Hyphens and dashes are pieces of punctuation that you don't use that often, but it's really good to know how to use them because, again, it adds some flavor and it adds some style to your writing. So whenever you write, you don't just always use periods and semicolons, but knowing how to use hyphens and dashes just really adds some flavor to your writing. So one of the first things we need to know about hyphens is that they're used to separate. And if you'll notice, this is what a hyphen looks like. It is one dash. And usually you use these, as it says, use them in fractions. So if you say the recipe called for 1/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder, you would put a hyphen between 1/4. Use them for compound numbers. Compound means two numbers, as in 30 and 7. 50 and 2. You would not hyphenate like 100, 200, 300, 10 million, 5,000. Not those kind of numbers. The kind of numbers you use a hyphen for are compound numbers. So, for example, if you're writing a check and you have to pay $122, you would put a hyphen between 20 and 2. So that is a life lesson for each of you whenever you have to write checks. And probably the biggest time you'll use hyphens is when you have to use them between compound adjectives. And I'm pretty sure we've talked about compound adjectives, not 100% sure, but a compound adjective just means there's two adjectives that are describing a noun. If you'll look, for example, in the first one, it says Rod Stewart, Elton John, and Mick Jagger are world-famous rock singers. If you'll notice, world famous has a hyphen between it because it is a compound adjective describing what kind of singers they are. So you would put a hyphen between it. But in the second example, the rock singers Rod Stewart, Elton John, and Mick Jagger are world famous. You don't use the hyphen there because world famous is not describing a noun that follows it. So you might use that type of hyphen frequently, more often than the other times, but just make sure you know how to use that one in particular. A rule of thumb is you don't use hyphens between adverbs ending in ly. I don't know if people really do that anymore because it's kind of common sense that you don't, but just in case you want to know, you don't use hyphens in adverbs in an ly. You wouldn't say fast hyphen-ly or quick hyphen-ly. That just doesn't make sense. And then the last two may or may not be used, but they're good to know. You use them with prefixes such as ex, self, and all, and the suffix elect. And the example says, my ex-boyfriend is president-elect of the Coldplay fan club. If you say you were like self-sufficient, you would use self hyphen efficient. Or if it's like the ex-president or the ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, whatever it may be, you would use that with a hyphen. And then you would use prefixes before proper nouns or adjectives. And again, may or may not use that, but the example says he testified before the Unacademic Society in mid-May. So you would use, again, it's kind of going back to you use it with ex and all and self. So mid-May and unacademic, you would use hyphens whenever you use the prefixes mid and un. And dashes are the other piece of punctuation. It's good to know. Dashes are just, essentially it's two hyphens typed together with no space between them, before them, or after them. And whenever you're writing, you want to use these sparingly. You don't want to fill your essays or your research papers with dashes. But they're really good to use to set off information. Instead of using commas, let's say you've used commas quite frequently within a paper and maybe you think, well, I don't want to use commas that much anymore. You can use hyphens, or dashes, to kind of create the same effect, but you only want to do it every once in a while. And the example I have for that is 3 members of my family, Aunt Loretta, Uncle Marshall, and cousin Francine, were born in Chicago. And the dashes take the place of commas. But, you know, since Aunt Loretta, comma, Uncle Marshall, comma, there's a lot of commas going on, so we don't want to blow the reader's mind with having commas everywhere and they can't figure out what you're saying or what's going on. And then you can also use dashes to set off information that you want to show strong emphasis about. And it says rich desserts, snack food, and alcohol. These are a dieter's downfall.